Billionaire CEO forcefully demands she leave, then finds her nursing 2 babies at the clinic. They're mine. His voice cracked on the word, 18 months of certainty collapsing into rubble as he stared at the 2 infants nestled against her chest. She looked up at him with eyes that had learned to freeze over, eyes that had once looked at him with love and now held nothing but cold steel. They're mine, she corrected, her voice quiet but fierce enough to cut through bone. I carried them. I birthed them alone at 2 in the morning with no one holding my hand. I've raised them for 6 months without a single phone call, text, or acknowledgement from their biological father. Biology doesn't make you a parent, Scott. Presence does. And you chose absence the moment you stood in front of our entire department and told security to escort me out like I was a criminal. The babies shifted against her chest, one of them making a small sound of contentment that seemed impossibly peaceful given the war happening between their parents. Scott Callahan, the man who had built a $3 billion empire on the foundation of never showing weakness, stood frozen in a community clinic waiting room, completely undone by the sight of 2 infants with his mother's nose and his grandmother's stubborn chin. "Why didn't you tell me?" he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, Shanice. They've been alive for 6 months and I didn't know. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was hollow, echoing off the fluorescent lights and plastic chairs of the Harmony Community Clinic. Tell you? You mean the man who announced my reassignment in front of 30 colleagues? The man who implied I was inappropriate, unprofessional, that my continued presence was no longer aligned with company values? That's the man I should have called with happy news? That's the man I should have trusted with the most precious thing I've ever created? He flinched like she had struck him, because in a way, she had. Every word landed exactly where it was meant to land, in the soft places he had spent his entire adult life protecting. I didn't know, he repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it matter. You knew everything you needed to know about me, Scott. You just didn't care. You knew I loved you. You knew I trusted you. You knew I had given you parts of myself I had never given anyone else. And you destroyed all of it in a conference room on a Monday morning because loving me made you uncomfortable and my best friend offered you an easier path. So no, I didn't tell you about the pregnancy because I had already learned exactly what you do when things get complicated. You run. You destroy. You protect yourself at everyone else's expense. And I would rather raise these children alone than let them learn that kind of love from their father. The waiting room had gone silent around them. Other patients pretending not to listen, failing completely. A woman in scrubs paused at the doorway, unsure whether to intervene. The weight of 18 months hung between Scott and Shanice like a physical thing, heavy and sharp and impossible to ignore. I was wrong, Scott said finally. Everything I did was wrong. Congratulations on the revelation, Shanice replied flatly. Now please step back. You're crowding my children. What you're about to witness is the story of a man who had everything except the ability to love without fear, and a woman who built an empire from the ashes of his destruction. This is a story about second chances, but not the easy kind. This is about earning the right to try again when you've already proven you can't be trusted. This is about the difference between wanting redemption and doing the work to deserve it. But before I take you through every heartbreaking, transformative moment of this journey, I need you to understand exactly how they got here. How Scott Callahan became the kind of man who would destroy the woman he loved in public. How Shanice Devereaux survived that destruction and built something better from the ruins. And how 2 innocent children became the bridge between who their parents were and who they might still become. This is their story. And it begins 18 months before that clinic waiting room in a glass tower in Chicago where love and ambition collided in ways neither of them expected. The offices of Meridian Technologies occupied the top 15 floors of a building that Scott Callahan had designed himself. Not literally, of course. He had hired architects, engineers, designers with credentials longer than his arm. But the vision had been his. A tower that spoke of power without apology. Glass walls that reflected the Chicago skyline back at itself. Conference rooms that felt like stages and offices that felt like thrones. Scott had built this empire from a garage office and $73 in savings. He had been 22 years old, angry at a world that had taken his father and left his mother working 3 jobs to keep them fed. He had promised himself then that he would never be vulnerable again, never dependent, never at the mercy of anyone else's choices. He would build something so big and so solid that no one could ever hurt him the way his father's abandonment had. And he had succeeded. Meridian Technologies was worth $3 billion. Scott was on magazine covers and keynote stages. He was invited to dinners at the White House and consulted by Fortune 500 CEOs. He was everything he had promised that angry 22-year-old he would become. He was also completely alone. Not technically, of course. He had a board of directors, executive teams, hundreds of employees who depended on his decisions for their livelihoods. He had Vivian Mercer, his business partner and 15% stakeholder, who had been there since the early days and whose ambition matched his own. He had acquaintances who called themselves friends at networking events and women who were interested in what his success could offer them rather than anything genuine about who he was. But alone in the way that mattered. No one who knew him without the armor. No one who saw past the CEO persona to the complicated, wounded man beneath. No one who challenged him to be more than successful, to be actually happy. Until Shanice. She had started as his executive assistant 3 years before everything fell apart. One of dozens of candidates, unremarkable on paper except for the quiet confidence she brought into the interview. Most people who sat across from Scott Callahan were intimidated by him. They stuttered, over-explained, tried too hard to impress. Shanice had simply answered his questions directly, asked a few pointed questions of her own, and treated him like a person rather than a trophy to be won. He had hired her on the spot. Within 6 months, she had become indispensable. She knew his coffee order, his schedule, his tells when he was lying in board meetings. She could finish his sentences and predict his decisions. She handled crises with a kind of calm competence that made chaos feel manageable. She was the only person in the building he actually trusted, though he would never have admitted it then. Their relationship was professional perfection. She made his impossible schedule work. He paid her well and respected her expertise. They spent 12-hour days in proximity without ever crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. He noticed that she was beautiful, of course. Dark eyes, warm skin, the kind of smile that made you want to know what she was thinking. But he was her boss, and Scott Callahan did not complicate his professional life with personal entanglements. Until the Westbrook acquisition. It was a deal worth $800 million, the kind of acquisition that would cement Meridian's position in the industry for a decade. Scott had been working on it for months, negotiating, strategizing, preparing for every possible complication, and then, 3 days before the signing, everything fell apart. The Westbrook CEO got cold feet. Their legal team found issues with the contract language. Investors started asking questions that sounded like accusations. By midnight, everyone else had gone home. The executive team had given their input and retreated to their families. The lawyers had promised to reconvene in the morning. Only Scott remained, surrounded by documents and cold coffee, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. And Shanice, she hadn't asked if she could stay. She had simply stayed, ordering dinner, organizing documents, being present in a way that asked for nothing and offered everything. At 2 a.m, she had pointed to a clause in the contract that everyone else had missed, a provision that could be restructured to address every concern the Westbrook team had raised. Scott had stared at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" he had asked. And it wasn't about her resume. She had smiled, tired, but genuine. Someone who pays attention. They had saved the deal. Signed the papers 3 days later to applause and champagne and photographs that would appear in business publications around the world, but something had shifted between them that night. Something neither of them could name or take back. The conversation started happening after hours. Small moments when the building emptied and they were alone with their work and each other. He learned that she had been raised by her grandmother after losing her parents young. She learned about his father's abandonment, the wound that had shaped everything he had become. They talked about ambitions and fears, about the gap between success and happiness, about the loneliness that lived beneath polished exteriors. Scott began looking forward to mornings because she would be in them. He began imagining futures that included someone else, something he had trained himself never to do. He began feeling things that had no place in his carefully controlled life. The first kiss happened after a product launch that had exceeded every projection. They were alone in his office, the city spread below them like a promise, and he had kissed her like she was the answer to a question he had been afraid to ask. She had kissed him back like she had been waiting. They agreed to keep it secret. Professional complications, they told themselves. The relationship between a CEO and his executive assistant would raise questions they didn't want to answer. So they stole moments between meetings, weekends at his penthouse ordering room service, nights that felt like they existed outside of time. 6 months of happiness that neither of them had expected. Shanice discovered parts of Scott that no one else had seen. the tenderness he hid beneath his armor, the humor that emerged when he felt safe, the capacity for real connection that his wounded childhood had taught him to bury. She loved him not despite his damage, but because of it, because she understood that broken people could still be worthy of love. Scott discovered parts of himself he had forgotten existed, the ability to laugh without calculation, the desire to be known rather than just admired, the terrifying, exhilarating experience of needing someone in ways that his entire adult life had been designed to prevent. But with the love came fear. The deeper he fell, the more exposed he felt. The more he needed her, the more vulnerable he became. And vulnerability was something Scott Callahan had spent 30 years learning to destroy before it could destroy him. He started pulling back even as he pulled her closer, canceling plans at the last minute, finding reasons to work late instead of spending evenings together, building walls within the relationship that he had never meant to build. Shanice noticed. Of course she noticed. She knew him better than anyone. "What's wrong?" she asked one night when he had been distant for a week. "Nothing. Just work stress." "Don't lie to me, Scott. Something's changed. Tell me what it is." But he couldn't tell her, because telling her would mean admitting that he was terrified of loving her, terrified of needing her, terrified that if he let himself depend on her completely, she would eventually leave, and he would be that abandoned 8-year-old again, watching his father's car disappear and learning that people who promised to stay didn't always keep that promise. So he said nothing, and the distance between them grew. That's when Vivian Mercer started paying attention. Vivian had been with Meridian almost as long as Scott. She had invested early, believed in his vision when no one else would, and built herself into an essential part of the company's success. She was brilliant, ambitious, and she'd always wanted more from Scott than just business partnership. She watched Scott and Shanice with the careful attention of someone who recognized a threat. The way he looked at his assistant when he thought no one was watching. The way Shanice had begun accompanying him to events that didn't require an executive assistant. The subtle shift in their dynamic that spoke of something deeper than professional respect. Vivian had learned long ago that the most effective manipulation looked like helpfulness, so she began helping. "I'm worried about you," she told Scott over drinks after a board meeting. "You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine. The numbers don't lie. Your attention is divided. The board is starting to notice." "Notice what?" "That your judgment might be compromised. That there are things influencing your decisions that have nothing to do with what's best for the company." She never said Shanice's name. She didn't have to. The implication hung in the air between them, and Scott's fear translated it perfectly. "People talk," Vivian continued. "An executive assistant who travels with you, who stays late with you, who has more access to you than anyone else in the company. It raises questions. There's nothing inappropriate happening. I believe you. But perception matters. And right now the perception is that you're becoming vulnerable in ways that could hurt the company." Vulnerable. The word landed like a bomb in the center of Scott's carefully controlled psyche. Everything he had built was designed to prevent vulnerability. And here was Vivian confirming his worst fear, that loving Shanice had made him weak, that his need for her was visible, exploitable, dangerous. The next board meeting felt different. Scott sat in a room full of people he had worked with for years, and suddenly their questions seemed pointed. Their glances seemed knowing. Their respect seemed conditional in ways it had never seemed before. Vivian watched him process this, her face a mask of professional concern that hid something colder beneath. "If you want my advice," she offered after the meeting, "you need to reassert control. Make it clear that nothing and no one influences your decisions except what's best for Meridian. Show the board that their concerns are unfounded." "And how exactly would I do that?" Vivian smiled. "By removing the distraction. Before I continue with the moment that changed everything, the moment that would send Shanice's world crashing down and set this entire story in motion, I need to pause and speak directly to you. If you're still watching, it's because something about this story resonates with your own experience. Maybe you've been in a relationship where fear poisoned something beautiful. Maybe you've watched someone you trusted choose their comfort over your dignity. Maybe you've been Shanice, blindsided by betrayal. Or maybe you've been Scott, so afraid of vulnerability that you destroyed what you loved before it could destroy you. This channel exists for moments like this, for stories that don't just entertain but illuminate the complicated truth about human relationships, about the distance between who we want to be and who we actually are when we're tested. If this story is speaking to you, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, not because I'm asking, but because the algorithm uses your subscription to show this content to other people who need to hear it. People who are navigating their own impossible situations. People who need to believe that survival is possible. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone who claimed to love you, drop a comment telling me your story. I read every single comment, and your voice matters in this community we're building. Now let me take you to the conference room where everything between Scott and Shanice was destroyed. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. 30 people gathered in conference room A, the largest space in the building, expecting a routine departmental update. Shanice sat in her usual place, tablet ready for notes, coffee at her elbow, no idea that her entire life was about to implode. Scott had not slept the night before. He had paced his penthouse, rehearsing words that felt like poison in his mouth, telling himself this was necessary, telling himself he was protecting the company, protecting his reputation, protecting himself from a vulnerability that had become too dangerous to maintain. He had not told Shanice what was coming. In his twisted logic, he had convinced himself that a private conversation would be worse, that she would argue, that he would fold under the pressure of her pain and change his mind. A public announcement was cleaner, professional, the kind of decisive action that proved he was still in control. He was a coward, telling himself he was brave. He was a man destroying something precious because holding it felt too dangerous. The meeting began normally. Quarterly projections, marketing updates, the bureaucratic rhythm of corporate existence. Shanice took notes, asked clarifying questions, performed her job with the excellence that had always defined her. And then Scott stood. Before we adjourn, I need to address an organizational matter. 30 faces turned toward him. Shanice looked up from her tablet, curiosity in her expression, no suspicion at all. She trusted him. She had no idea what he was capable of. After careful consideration, we've decided to restructure several positions within the executive support team. Effective immediately, Shanice Devereaux will be transitioning out of her current role. Her continued presence in this capacity is no longer aligned with company values and objectives. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples of confusion spreading across the room. Glances exchanged between colleagues who sensed something beneath the corporate language. Shanice's face went blank. The tablet in her hands trembled slightly before she steadied it through force of will. Human resources will facilitate the transition, Scott continued, his voice steady only because he had practiced this, because he was forcing himself not to look at her. Security will assist with collecting personal belongings. We thank Shanice for her years of service and wish her well in future endeavors. That was it. 3 sentences to end 3 years of professional excellence and 6 months of intimate love. 3 sentences to destroy a woman who had given him everything and asked for nothing but honesty. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone in the room understood what had happened, what was really being said beneath the HR-approved language. The CEO's assistant was being removed, publicly, with implications clear enough to end her career anywhere in the industry. Security appeared at the conference room door. 2 uniformed guards who had no idea they were participating in a personal execution disguised as professional necessity. Shanice stood. Her movements were careful, deliberate, the actions of someone who refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. She gathered her tablet, her coffee, her dignity, and then she looked at Scott. Their eyes met for the first time since he had started speaking. He expected anger, tears, the explosive confrontation he had designed this public setting to prevent. Instead, he saw something worse, understanding, devastating clarity about exactly who he was and what he had done. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was more damning than any accusation she could have made. She walked out of the conference room flanked by security guards, spine straight, head high, refusing to perform her humiliation for the audience he had gathered. And Scott stood at the head of the table watching her go, feeling something in his chest tear loose and knowing that he had done this to himself, to her, to everything they might have been. Vivian caught his eye across the room and nodded slightly. Approval, validation, the confirmation that he had done the right thing. He would realize later, much later, that this was the moment he should have known. The satisfaction in her expression, the way she had orchestrated his fear into action, the manipulation that had been invisible to him precisely because it told him what he wanted to believe. But in that moment, he saw nothing except the door closing behind Shanice and the silence of 30 people who would never look at him the same way again. The weeks after her departure blurred together. Scott threw himself into work with the desperate energy of someone trying to outrun his own conscience. 12-hour days became 16. Weekends disappeared into spreadsheets and strategy sessions. He built walls around the memory of her, told himself he had made the right choice, tried to believe that the emptiness he felt was freedom rather than loss. Vivian stepped into the vacuum Shanice had left. Not as his assistant, she was too senior for that, but as his primary counsel. She appeared at his side during meetings, offered advice during crises, positioned herself as the person he could trust now that the distraction had been removed. He didn't notice what she was doing because he didn't want to notice. He was too busy convincing himself that he felt nothing. Meanwhile, Shanice was discovering exactly how thoroughly Scott had destroyed her. The termination letter cited no specific cause. The corporate language was carefully vague, professional misconduct implied but never stated. And in the industry that Meridian dominated, vague implications from a CEO carried more weight than explicit accusations. Every job interview ended the same way. Polite smiles, promises to be in touch, phone calls that never came. She had been excellent at her job. She had been the person who made an impossible CEO manageable, who solved problems before they became crises, who worked 14-hour days without complaint because she believed in what she was building. And none of it mattered. Scott's public dismissal had marked her as damaged goods, someone to avoid rather than hire. Her savings lasted 2 months. Then she was living on credit cards, watching her debt climb while her options narrowed. Pride kept her from reaching out to colleagues who might have helped, who might have seen through Scott's implications if she had given them the chance. Pride and the humiliation of explaining what had really happened, of admitting that she had fallen in love with her boss and paid the price for it. 2 weeks after her termination, the morning sickness started. She told herself it was stress. The upheaval of her life, the sleepless nights, the anxiety that followed her everywhere. She bought crackers and ginger ale and tried to push through. But the nausea didn't pass. And when she finally bought the test, when she sat in the bathroom of her emptying apartment and watched the lines appear, she understood that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. Pregnant, with Scott Callahan's children. She took 4 more tests, different brands, watching the same result appear each time. She made an appointment with a doctor who confirmed what she already knew. Twins, 7 weeks along. Due date in late March. The decision point arrived with brutal clarity. She could tell him. Track down the man who had publicly humiliated her, beg for his attention, hope that fatherhood would transform him into someone worthy of her children. She could imagine how that conversation would go, his lawyers appearing before his apology, custody arrangements negotiated like business deals, her children becoming bargaining chips in a game she had never agreed to play. Or she could protect them, build something independent of his money and his chaos and his inability to love without destroying. Raise them in peace, away from board meetings and stock prices and the kind of man who chose his reputation over the people who trusted him. She thought about the conference room, his face when he had said those words, the way he had refused to look at her until the very end, as if she were a task to complete rather than a person to face. The security guards flanking her exit like she was a threat to be contained. That was who Scott Callahan was when things got hard, when his fear screamed louder than his love, when he had to choose between vulnerability and destruction. Her children would never learn that kind of love. She would make sure of it. She called her grandmother that night. Denise Devereaux was 74 years old, a retired nurse who had raised Shanice after her daughter, Shanice's mother, had died in a car accident when Shanice was 6. She lived in a modest apartment in a modest neighborhood, surviving on Social Security and the careful savings of a lifetime of practical decisions. "Baby girl, what's wrong?" Her grandmother's voice carried the weight of someone who had heard crisis before and knew how to meet it. Shanice told her everything. The relationship, the betrayal, the pregnancy, the impossible position she found herself in. Denise was quiet for a long moment after Shanice finished speaking. Then she said the words that would shape everything that came next. "Come home. We'll figure it out together." Shanice packed what remained of her Chicago life into boxes, sold the furniture she couldn't afford to move, closed accounts and forwarded mail, and erased every trace of the woman who had fallen in love with Scott Callahan. She did not tell him, did not reach out or explain or give him the chance to disappoint her children the way he had disappointed her. She simply left, carrying 2 lives inside her that he would never know existed. And Scott, surrounded by his billions and his empty penthouse and the bored confidence Vivian had promised to restore, had no idea that his world had just changed forever. The next 8 months tested everything Shanice thought she knew about strength. Living with her grandmother meant sharing a 2-bedroom apartment, converting the second bedroom into a nursery that would need to hold 2 cribs instead of 1. Denise gave up her sewing room without complaint, helped paint the walls a soft yellow, insisted on buying baby blankets even though her fixed income couldn't really afford them. Finding work proved almost impossible. The Meridian shadow followed Shanice everywhere, Scott's implications poisoning every opportunity before it could bloom. Her carefully built professional reputation had become a liability, 3 years of excellence erased by one man's public cruelty. Finally, a small nonprofit offered her a position. The organization focused on workforce development, helping unemployed single mothers rebuild their careers. The salary was a third of what she had earned at Meridian. The work was unglamorous, underfunded, desperately needed. And the director who hired her saw something in Shanice's story that resonated, though Shanice never shared the details. "You understand what our clients are going through," the director said. "That matters more than any resume." Shanice threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had brought to Meridian. She built programs from scratch, connected with clients who had been discarded by systems designed to ignore them, proved that crisis could become credential when you refused to let it become defeat. Her belly grew. First trimester nausea gave way to second trimester energy. She felt the babies move for the first time during a staff meeting, 2 separate flutters that made her gasp audibly. She learned their rhythms, their preferences, the way they kicked when she ate spicy food or stayed up too late. At night, she talked to them, told them stories about their grandmother Denise, about their great-grandmother who had survived things harder than this, about the line of strong women they came from. She did not talk about their father, did not think about him if she could help it, though some nights the memories ambushed her without warning. His laugh when he had forgotten to be guarded, the way he had looked at her like she was the first good thing he had ever allowed himself to want. The man he might have been if fear hadn't won. Those nights, she let herself grieve. Then she got up in the morning and kept building. The pregnancy was uncomplicated despite being twins. Her doctor marveled at her health, at the baby's development, at the strength of a body that refused to let circumstances diminish its capacity for creation. Shanice followed every recommendation, took every vitamin, attended every appointment, even when exhaustion made moving feel impossible. 6 months pregnant, she was running entire programs at the nonprofit. Her clients called her an inspiration, though she would never have used that word for herself. She was simply surviving, putting one foot in front of the other because there was no alternative, because 2 people were depending on her to figure it out. 7 months, 8 months. The nursery filled with borrowed equipment and secondhand clothes and the handmade blankets Denise created in the evenings while they watched television together. Everything modest, nothing excessive, all of it infused with love that didn't require money to be real. And then, at 2 in the morning on March 12th, the contractions started. Denise drove her to the hospital through empty streets, breaking speed limits she had obeyed for 50 years, muttering prayers under her breath that Shanice pretended not to hear. The labor was long and complicated. 22 hours of intensity, of Shanice gripping her grandmother's hand through waves of pain that threatened to overwhelm her. In the end, it was an emergency cesarean. The baby's positioned wrong, the doctors moving with urgent efficiency, Shanice watching the ceiling and trying not to be afraid. Maya arrived first. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, dark curls already visible, a cry that sounded like a declaration. The nurse placed her on Shanice's chest, and the world reorganized itself around that weight, around those eyes, around the absolute certainty that nothing before this moment had really mattered. Jordan came 2 minutes later. 6 pounds, 11 ounces, calmer than his sister, watching the world with an intensity that seemed impossible in someone so new. He was placed beside Maya on Shanice's chest, and she held them both, sobbing with exhaustion and relief, and a love so overwhelming it felt like its own kind of destruction. "You did it," Denise said, tears streaming down her own face. "Look at them. They're perfect." They were perfect. 2 complete humans who had grown inside her while she rebuilt her life, who had arrived exactly when they were supposed to, who would never know the man who had helped create them unless Shanice decided they should. She looked at their faces, searching for traces of Scott. Maya had his mother's nose, the shape she had seen in photographs Scott had shown her during their brief happiness. Jordan had something in his chin, a stubbornness that came from elsewhere in Scott's family tree. They were unmistakably his children, biology written in features that would become more recognizable as they grew. But they were also unmistakably hers, raised in her body, born through her pain, destined to be shaped by her love. Scott had contributed biology. She would contribute everything else. The hospital room was quiet, As the night gave way to morning, Denise dozed in the uncomfortable visitor's chair. Maya and Jordan slept in their bassinets, finally still after hours of adjusting to the shock of existence. And Shanice lay awake, too transformed for sleep, staring at the ceiling and accepting that her life would never be the same. She had entered this hospital as a woman surviving her own destruction. She left it as a mother, responsible for 2 people who depended on her for everything. The shift was seismic, fundamental, the kind of change that erases the person you were and leaves someone new in their place. This is the story so far. A woman betrayed, a man too afraid to love, and 2 children who entered a world that wasn't quite ready for them. But the story is far from over, because 6 months after this hospital room, in a community clinic across the city, Shanice would look up from nursing her twins and see the man who destroyed her standing frozen in the doorway. And everything would change again. The first 6 months of motherhood tested Shanice in ways she hadn't known she could be tested. Twins meant double everything. Double feedings every 3 hours around the clock until sleep became a distant memory. Double diapers, the changing station always occupied, the laundry perpetual. Double crying, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in cacophony, always demanding attention she didn't have enough of. Denise helped when she could, but she was 74 with her own body's limitations. She could hold one baby while Shanice fed the other, could rock a fussy infant while Shanice showered for the first time in 3 days, could offer wisdom accumulated over decades of nursing and mothering. But she couldn't do the night feedings, or the 3 a.m. walks with colicky Jordan, or the endless logistics of keeping 2 small humans alive. That was Shanice's work. Alone, she returned to her job 8 weeks after giving birth because her savings were gone, and her maternity leave was unpaid. There was no alternative. Daycare costs consumed most of her paycheck, a calculus that seemed designed to punish women for having children while needing to work. She built schedules with the precision of an engineer, every minute accounted for, every transition choreographed. Morning routines started at 5 a.m., feeding both babies, dressing both babies, packing the diaper bag with military precision, dropping them at daycare with instructions and emergency numbers, and the heartbreak of leaving them that never got easier. 8 hours at the nonprofit, helping other women build the stability she was fighting for herself. Then daycare pickup, dinner, preparation, evening feeding, bath time, the bedtime routine that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Collapse into her own bed around 10, knowing that midnight would bring the first feeding and 3 a.m. would bring the second, and morning would arrive before she was ready for it. This was her life. Exhausting, relentless, occasionally punctuated by moments of such overwhelming love that the exhaustion seemed worth it. Maya was developing her personality, demanding, curious, stubborn in ways that reminded Shanice of her own mother. She wanted attention constantly, protested loudly when she didn't get it, and smiled with her entire face when she was happy. She was learning to reach for things, to track movement with her eyes, to communicate preferences that didn't require words. Jordan was quieter. He watched the world with serious attention, processing everything before reacting. He seemed content to observe, while Maya demanded, patient in ways that felt almost philosophical for a 6-month-old. But when he smiled, it transformed his whole face. And Shanice lived for those moments of unexpected joy. They knew her now, recognized her voice, her face, her particular way of holding them. They turned toward her when she entered her room, reached for her when they were upset, fell asleep against her chest with the absolute trust of children who had never been let down. She was their world, and they were hers. The loneliness of single parenthood was its own challenge. She had no time for friendships, no energy for socializing, no capacity to maintain connections that required attention she didn't have. The friends from her Meridian days had faded with the job, uncomfortable with the implications of her departure and unwilling to risk association with someone marked by scandal. Her world contracted to work, babies, grandmother, sleep. The repetition sometimes felt like drowning, but she also discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. The ability to function on 4 hours of sleep, the patience to soothe a crying baby at 3 a.m. when every nerve was screaming, the love that made impossible things possible, that turned exhaustion into endurance and sacrifice into purpose. She was not the same woman Scott Callahan had destroyed 18 months ago. That woman had been capable and confident, but untested. This woman had survived pregnancy alone, birth alone, 6 months of single motherhood with twins. This woman had built something from rubble that couldn't be taken away. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday in September, she took the twins to the Harmony Community Clinic for their 6-month checkup. The clinic was modest but clean, serving the community that Denise had been part of for 40 years. Shanice had chosen it because her grandmother trusted the staff, because the pediatrician came highly recommended, because the sliding scale fees were the only thing that fit her budget. She arrived early, babies in their double stroller, diaper bags slung over her shoulder. The waiting room was half full, other families with their own children, their own stories, their own complicated lives. She checked in at the desk, found a seat near the window, and began the wait. Maya was fussy, overstimulated by the new environment. Jordan was calm, watching the other children with his characteristic serious attention. Shanice pulled out the toys she had packed, distracted Maya with a soft rattle, tried to settle them both while managing the logistics of the appointment ahead. The door to the examination rooms opened. A nurse called her name. She gathered the babies, the bags, the accumulated supplies of motherhood, and followed the nurse back for the checkup that would confirm what she already knew. Her children were healthy, thriving, perfect. The appointment lasted 40 minutes. Vaccinations that made both babies cry. Weight and height measurements that showed appropriate development. The pediatrician's approval of everything Shanice was doing, the validation she hadn't known she needed. When she emerged from the examination room, carrying both babies because Maya had refused to go back in the stroller, she was focused entirely on soothing their post-vaccination distress. She did not see him at first. She found a seat in the waiting area, settled Maya against her chest, positioned Jordan in the crook of her arm. They needed to be fed, both of them, and modesty had become a luxury she couldn't afford. She adjusted her clothing, began nursing them with the practiced efficiency of a mother who had done this countless times. Only then did she look up, and there he was, Scott Callahan, standing in the entrance of the Harmony Community Clinic like he had been conjured from her worst nightmares. $3 billion in a $4,000 suit, so out of place among the plastic chairs and fluorescent lights that he might as well have been glowing. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Everything that had happened between them, everything that had happened since, collapsed into a single moment of recognition that neither of them was prepared for. His gaze moved from her face to the babies at her chest, to the two children who were unmistakably his, who had lived their entire lives without his knowledge, who were nursing contentedly against the woman he had destroyed in a conference room 18 months ago. She watched him do the math, watched his face shift through shock, understanding, devastation, watched him realize exactly what his choices had cost him. And for the first time since that conference room, Shanice felt something other than pain when she looked at Scott Callahan. She felt power. This is where we began. The clinic waiting room, the confrontation that would change everything. But now you understand how they arrived at this moment. Now you understand the weight of what Scott is seeing, the transformation that Shanice has undergone, the 18 months of separate journeys that have led them back to each other. The question is, what happens next? Whether the man who destroyed everything can become someone worthy of rebuilding it. Whether the woman who survived can find the courage to let someone earn her trust again. Whether two children, innocent of all the pain that surrounds them, can become the bridge between who their parents were and who they might still become. In part 2 of this story, you will witness the confrontation that reshapes 3 lives. You will see Scott Callahan face the consequences of his choices in ways he never imagined. You will watch Shanice Devereaux make impossible decisions about forgiveness and second chances, and you will learn whether some broken things can truly be rebuilt, or whether some damage is simply too deep to repair. But before I continue, I need to ask you for something. This story has taken us through devastation and survival, through the worst of what people do to each other, and the best of what we're capable of when we refuse to be destroyed. If this journey has meant something to you, if you've recognized yourself in Shanice's pain or Scott's fear, or the complicated truth that love and damage often live in the same heart, I need you to take action right now. Hit that like button, not because I'm asking, but because your engagement tells the algorithm that this story matters, that these themes resonate, that there are people out there who need to hear that survival is possible. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on the notification bell, because part 2 of this story will challenge everything you think you know about redemption and second chances. And drop a comment telling me what you think should happen next. Should Shanice give Scott the chance to know his children? Can someone who caused that much damage truly change? I read every comment, and your perspective matters in this community we're building together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about stories that go deeper than entertainment, that wrestle with the real questions about love and loss and the possibility of becoming better than our worst moments. Stay tuned for part 2. The confrontation is just beginning, and what happens next will transform everything. The silence between them stretched into eternity. Scott stood frozen in the clinic doorway, his body refusing the commands his brain was sending. Move. Speak. Do something. But he couldn't. He was paralyzed by the sight of Shanice nursing 2 infants who had his eyes, his mother's nose, his grandmother's stubborn chin. She spoke first. Don't. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Her voice was different than he remembered. Harder. Colder. The warmth that had once made him feel safe had been replaced by something that felt like armor. They're mine. The words escaped him before he could stop them, his voice cracking on the confession. They're mine. I carried them. I birthed them. I've raised them for 6 months without a single phone call, text, or acknowledgement from their biological father. Biology doesn't make you a parent, Scott. Presence does. And you chose absence the moment you stood in front of our entire department and told security to escort me out like I was a criminal. The other people in the waiting room had gone silent. Conversations abandoned. Phones lowered. Every eye in the space drawn to the drama unfolding between the billionaire in the expensive suit and the woman with 2 babies who clearly wanted nothing to do with him. This isn't the place, Scott managed. Can we talk somewhere private? Why should I go anywhere with you? Why should I give you a single moment of my time after what you did? Because those are my children. Because I didn't know. Because whatever I did to you, whatever I deserve, they deserve the chance to know their father. Shanice laughed. The sound was hollow, echoing off the fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. Now you want to be a father. Now, when they're 6 months old and the hard part is over. Now, when someone else did the work of growing them and birthing them and keeping them alive through colic and sleepless nights and the terror of being responsible for 2 human beings completely alone. I didn't know, Scott repeated. If I had known, things would have been different. Would they? Would they really? Because I know exactly what you do when things get complicated, Scott. You destroy them. You protect yourself at everyone else's expense. You stand in conference rooms and use corporate language to disguise the cruelty of what you're actually doing. One of the babies, the girl, began to fuss. Shanice adjusted her hold, soothed her automatically, the gestures of a mother who had done this thousands of times. Scott watched, useless, an outsider to a bond he had never been given the chance to form. A nurse appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension. Is everything all right here? Fine, Shanice said. This gentleman was just leaving. I'm not leaving. Then I am. She stood, gathering the babies with practiced efficiency, tucking them into the double stroller she had parked nearby. Every movement spoke of competence built through necessity, of a woman who had learned to manage alone because she had no other choice. Shanice, please. She paused, stroller handles in her grip, and turned to face him one final time. You have no right to ask me for anything. You gave up every right when you chose your reputation over my dignity. When you let Vivian Mercer convince you that I was a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. When you decided that the fear of vulnerability was more important than the reality of what we had. Vivian. The name landed like a punch. How did you know about Vivian? I'm not stupid, Scott. I saw the way she looked at you. Saw the way she positioned herself after I was gone. I figured out pretty quickly who was whispering in your ear, telling you that loving me made you weak. That's not what happened, isn't it? Tell me then. Tell me why you did it. Not the corporate language you used in that conference room. The real reason you destroyed me in front of 30 people instead of ending things privately like a human being. Scott opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain, to offer the justifications he had been rehearsing for 18 months. But standing in that clinic, looking at the woman he had wronged and the children he had never known existed, all his carefully constructed excuses crumbled into dust. I was scared. The admission hung in the air between them, raw, undefended, the first honest thing he had said to her since before everything fell apart. I was scared of how much I felt for you, scared of needing you, scared that if I let myself depend on you completely, you would eventually leave and I would be that abandoned kid again, watching my father disappear. So I destroyed it first. I destroyed it before it could destroy me. And I told myself I was being smart, being strategic, protecting myself from inevitable pain. But I wasn't. I was just being a coward. Shanice stared at him for a long moment. He watched emotions flicker across her face. Anger, pain, something that might have been recognition. Finally, she spoke. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in 18 months. I know. It doesn't change what you did. I know that too. She exhaled slowly, some of the rigid tension leaving her shoulders. The babies had settled, content in their stroller, oblivious to the history being excavated around them. There's a consultation room down the hall. We can talk there. But Scott, if this is some kind of game, some strategy to protect your reputation or control the narrative, I will destroy you. I have nothing left to lose and 18 months of anger to fuel me. Do you understand? I understand. She led him down the corridor, pushing the stroller with the ease of long practice. The consultation room was small and clinical, harsh lighting and plastic chairs. Nothing like the luxurious conference rooms where Scott usually conducted important conversations. But this was the most important conversation of his life, and somehow the modest setting felt appropriate. Stripped of his wealth and status, forced to face the consequences of his choices in a room that didn't care who he was or what he was worth. Shanice settled into a chair, lifting both babies from the stroller, one in each arm. Scott sat across from her, close enough to see the details of their faces, the features he recognized, the features that were entirely new. Their names, he said. Please, tell me their names. Maya. She nodded toward the baby on her left, the one who had been fussing earlier. She's demanding, curious, already stubborn in ways that drive me crazy. And him, Jordan. He's quieter, watches everything before he reacts. The pediatrician says he's advanced for his age, tracking and processing more than most 6-month-olds. Scott studied their faces, memorizing every detail. Maya looked back at him with an intensity that felt almost confrontational, as if she was already evaluating whether he was worth her attention. Jordan observed him calmly, reserving judgment, waiting for more information. They're perfect, he said finally, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. Yes, they are, which is why I spent 6 months keeping them away from you, because perfection requires protection, and you had already proven you couldn't be trusted. The words stung. They were meant to. Scott absorbed them without defense because he had no defense to offer. What would it take? What? To prove I've changed. To prove I can be trusted with them. Not with you. I don't have the right to ask for anything with you. But with Maya and Jordan, what would it take to earn the chance to know them? Shanice was silent for a long moment, her face unreadable. The baby shifted in her arms, small movements that she accommodated automatically, her body attuned to their needs in ways that spoke of months of practice. I don't know if there's anything you could do, she admitted finally. Every time I think about letting you into their lives, I remember that conference room. I remember the way you looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. I remember security escorting me out while everyone watched. And I think about Maya and Jordan experiencing that kind of betrayal from someone who was supposed to love them. I would never hurt them. You never thought you would hurt me either. The truth of it silenced him. She was right. He had loved her, genuinely loved her, and he had still destroyed her. What guarantee could he offer that he wouldn't do the same to his children when his fear got the better of him again? I've been in therapy, he said quietly, for almost a year now. After you left, after everything fell apart, I started having panic attacks. Couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. My doctor recommended someone. At first I went because I thought something was medically wrong, but the more I talked, the more I realized the panic was coming from somewhere deeper, from the fear I'd been running from my entire life, from the damage my father's abandonment had done that I'd never really faced. Shanice listened without interrupting. Her expression gave nothing away. I'm not saying I'm fixed, Scott continued. I'm not saying therapy solved everything. But I understand now what I did and why. I understand that destroying you was my way of controlling a situation I couldn't control. And I understand that if I don't change, I'll keep destroying everything good that comes into my life. Words, Shanice said flatly. Those are all just words. You're right, they are. So let me prove it. Whatever structure you need. Supervised visits. Scheduled phone calls. Months of probation before you trust me with anything real. I'll do all of it. I'll earn the right to be their father, day by day, decision by decision. And if you fail, if you disappoint them, if you make promises and don't keep them, then you'll know you were right to protect them from me. And I'll accept whatever consequences come from that. The babies were getting restless. Maya beginning to squirm with the energy of someone who didn't want to be held still anymore. Jordan making small sounds that suggested an opinion he couldn't quite articulate yet. I need to feed them, Shanice said. And I need time to think. This isn't a decision I can make in a clinic consultation room with you sitting 3 feet away. I understand. I'll give you one thing right now. One concession. You can hold one of them. Once. For 5 minutes. And then you leave and let me figure out what happens next. Scott's breath caught in his chest. The offer was minimal, almost insulting, given that these were his children. But he understood what she was really offering. A test. A chance to prove he could accept boundaries, could defer to her judgment, could be something other than the controlling force that had characterized his entire career. Thank you. Shanice hesitated, then carefully transferred Maya into his arms. She's particular about being held. Support her back. Keep her close. She doesn't like feeling unsupported. Scott adjusted his grip, following her instructions, acutely aware that this was the first time he had ever held his daughter. Maya looked up at him with those demanding eyes, evaluating, deciding whether this new person was acceptable. He said softly. I'm your father. I know that doesn't mean much yet, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it means something. Maya continued to stare at him. Then, slowly, her small hand reached out and grasped the fabric of his jacket. Held on. A grip that was surprisingly strong for someone so small. She likes you, Shanice observed, her voice neutral. Or, at least she likes your jacket. Expensive fabric. Scott laughed despite everything. The sound surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed genuinely, without calculation or performance. Maya, he said again, testing her name on his tongue. Maya. And Jordan. I'm going to learn everything about you. Every preference. Every fear. Every small thing that makes you who you are. And I'm going to be there for all of it. I promise. Don't make promises, Shanice warned. Not yet. Promises mean nothing until they're kept. Then I'll keep them first. And you can call them promises after. The 5 minutes ended too quickly. Shanice took Maya back, settled both babies in the stroller, began the process of leaving. Scott watched, wanting to help, knowing that offering would be overstepping. I'm staying at the Morrison Hotel downtown, he said as she prepared to go. My mother is having tests done here. That's why I was in the clinic. I'll be in the city for at least another week. Your mother, Eleanor. She's been volunteering at this clinic for 20 years. She insisted on having her check up here rather than anywhere else. Shanice paused at the door. Eleanor Callahan. I've heard the staff talk about her. They adore her. She's a good person, better than I've been. The statement hung between them, an admission and an aspiration wrapped into one sentence. I'll contact you when I've decided what happens next, Shanice said finally. Don't try to reach me. Don't show up at my apartment. Don't do anything that makes me feel surveilled or controlled. If I decide to let you into their lives, it will be on my terms. Completely. I understand. Good. She left without looking back. Scott stood in the empty consultation room, surrounded by the lingering presence of the people who had just walked out of his life, possibly forever. He had been given 5 minutes with his daughter, 5 minutes out of 6 months. The mathematics of his failure were staggering when he calculated them honestly. But she had said she would contact him. She had said when, not if. That was something. A door left slightly open. A chance he hadn't earned, but had been given anyway. For the first time in 18 months, Scott Callahan felt something other than the hollow achievement of success. He felt hope. The week that followed was the longest of Scott's life. He stayed in the city, ostensibly for his mother's medical tests, which revealed nothing serious enough to require worry. Eleanor was healthy, the doctors assured them, just dealing with the ordinary complications of a body that had been working hard for 73 years. But that wasn't why Scott stayed. He stayed because somewhere in this city, Shanice was deciding whether to let him know his children, and leaving felt like abandoning the possibility before it had a chance to bloom. His phone rang constantly. Board members wanting decisions, investors wanting reassurance, Vivian wanting to know why he had canceled 3 meetings and extended his trip without explanation. He ignored most of the calls, delegated what he could, let the empire run itself for a few days while he dealt with something more important than quarterly projections. His mother noticed the change. You're different, Eleanor observed over dinner at her modest apartment, a space that looked nothing like the lifestyle her billionaire son could have provided. She'd refused his offers to relocate her to something grander, insisting that her home was exactly what she needed and nothing more. Different how? Quieter, less distracted. You haven't checked your phone in almost an hour. That might be a record since you were 16. Scott set down his fork, considering how much to tell her. Eleanor had never met Shanice during their relationship. He had kept that part of his life separate, compartmentalized the way he compartmentalized everything. But now the compartments had collapsed, and the truth demanded acknowledgement. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Eleanor waited with the patience of a woman who had raised a complicated child and learned not to rush his revelations. 18 months ago, I was in a relationship with someone at the company. Shanice Devereaux. She was my executive assistant. We were together for 6 months, and I ended it badly, publicly, in a way that destroyed her professional reputation and forced her to leave the industry. His mother's expression didn't change, but he saw something shift behind her eyes. Concern, disappointment, the weight of a mother realizing her son had done something cruel. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw her yesterday, at the clinic, and she had 2 babies with her. Twins, 6 months old, mine." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the impact of his confession. When she opened them, they were wet with unshed tears. "You have children. I have children I didn't know about. Children she raised alone, because I proved I couldn't be trusted. Children who are perfect and beautiful, and completely unaware that their father exists. Oh, Scott, I know what I did. I know how wrong it was. I've spent a year in therapy understanding exactly how wrong it was. But Mom, I want to fix it. I want to earn the right to know them. I just don't know if she'll let me." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, crossed to where he sat, and wrapped her arms around him the way she had when he was a child, and the world felt too big to navigate. "Your father left because he was weak," she said softly, "because he couldn't handle the responsibility of love. You are not your father, Scott. You never have been. But you've been so afraid of becoming him that you've made choices that hurt people who trusted you. I know. The question is what you do now, not who you were, what you become." She pulled back, holding his face in her hands the way she had done when he was 8 years old and crying because the car had disappeared down the street and wasn't coming back. "Do you love them? These children you just learned about, I held Maya for 5 minutes, and I would burn the entire world down to protect her, to protect both of them, then fight for them, earn the right to know them. Be patient when patience feels impossible, and whatever Shanice decides, respect it completely. Because if she kept them from you, it's because you taught her that protecting them from you was necessary. That's on you to undo, day by day, choice by choice. What if she never trusts me? Then you'll spend the rest of your life proving you were worth trusting, even if she never sees it. Because being a good father isn't about whether someone lets you be one. It's about who you are, regardless of whether anyone is watching." Scott stayed at his mother's apartment late into the night, talking about things they had never discussed. His father's absence, her struggles, the walls he had built, and the damage those walls had caused. By the time he returned to his hotel, he felt scraped raw and somehow cleaner than he had in years. The call came 3 days later. Shanice's number appeared on his phone screen at 7 in the evening. Scott answered before the second ring. "Hello, I've thought about it." Her voice was businesslike, the tone of someone conducting a negotiation rather than a personal conversation. "I've talked to my grandmother. I've talked to my therapist. I've made a decision." Scott's heart stopped, restarted, stopped again. "I'm listening. Here are my terms. You can be in their lives, but only under conditions I set. There will be no unsupervised visits until I decide you've earned them. There will be weekly video calls, 15 minutes maximum, and I can end them at any time if they seem to be upsetting the babies. There will be monthly in-person visits supervised by me, and they will happen here, not wherever you decide is convenient. You will not buy them expensive gifts or try to influence them with your money. You will not tell anyone about them publicly until I give permission. And if you violate any of these terms, if you show up uninvited or try to go around my decisions, you will never see them again." "Are these terms acceptable?" Scott exhaled slowly, processing the constraints she was imposing. They were severe, limiting, the kind of restrictions that would have infuriated the version of himself he had been 18 months ago. "Yes," he said. "They're acceptable. Good. The first video call will be tomorrow at 6 p.m. I'll send you a link. Don't be late." "I won't be." She ended the call without goodbye. Scott stood in his hotel room, phone in hand, realizing that he had just been given the most important opportunity of his life, and he had no intention of wasting it. The following months established a pattern that became the foundation of everything that came after. Video calls every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Scott cleared his calendar completely during those 30-minute windows, delegating anything that conflicted, refusing meetings that couldn't be moved. He would sit in his home office in Chicago, laptop open, waiting for Shanice to connect. The first calls were awkward. Maya and Jordan didn't understand who the face on the screen was or why they should care. They squirmed and fussed and occasionally cried, while Shanice tried to engage them with this stranger who was technically their father. Scott learned to be patient, to speak softly, to sing songs he barely remembered from his own childhood, off-key and stumbling over lyrics. He learned which toys made Maya laugh and which sounds captured Jordan's attention. He learned the rhythms of their days, their preferences, their emerging personalities. Maya was demanding in ways that reminded him of himself at his worst and his mother at her best. She wanted what she wanted when she wanted it, and she had no patience for people who couldn't deliver. But when you met her demands, when you gave her the attention she craved, she smiled with her entire face and made you feel like the most important person in the world. Jordan was quieter, more observational, processing information before he responded. He would watch Scott through the screen with serious attention, evaluating, deciding. And occasionally, when Scott said something that pleased him, he would offer a smile so genuine that it made everything else worth it. The monthly visits were harder, flying to Shanice's city, staying in hotels, spending entire weekends in her modest apartment or public parks or children's museums while she watched his every interaction. The scrutiny was exhausting. The distance she maintained was painful. But Scott understood that every moment was a test, and he was determined to pass. He learned to change diapers with YouTube tutorial precision, learned to mix formula at the exact temperature Maya preferred, learned to rock Jordan in the specific rhythm that soothed him when nothing else would. He became competent at the mechanics of fatherhood, not because he was naturally talented, but because he refused to fail at something this important. Denise, Shanice's grandmother, observed him with the sharp attention of someone who had seen too many men make promises they didn't keep. "You're still here," she noted during his third visit, watching him attempt to feed Jordan while Maya demanded attention from across the room. "I told you I would be. Men tell me lots of things. Keeping them is rarer than you'd think. I understand why you're skeptical. I haven't earned your trust yet." "No, you haven't, but you're earning it. Slowly. The fact that you understand that matters." It was the closest thing to approval he had received from anyone in Shanice's life. He held on to it like a lifeline. The visits continued. Once a month became twice a month when Shanice decided he had proven consistent enough to increase the frequency. The video calls extended from 15 minutes to 30 when the babies started responding to his presence with recognition instead of confusion. Maya said something that sounded like Dada during a video call. Scott had to mute himself to hide the emotion that overwhelmed him. When he unmuted, Shanice was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She knows who you are now," Shanice said quietly. "They both do. Is that good? It's complicated. It means they're forming attachments, which means if you disappear, they'll feel the loss. You understand what that means, right? It means I can't disappear. I won't. You say that now. I'll say it in a year. In 5 years. In 20. However long it takes for you to believe me. What you're about to hear is the turning point of this story. The moment when everything Scott had been building was tested in ways he never expected. Because redemption isn't proven in easy moments. It's proven when the pressure comes, when the old patterns would be easy to return to, when choosing differently costs something real. I need you to stay with me through what happens next. And before we continue, I need to ask you something. If this story has been speaking to you, if you've recognized yourself in Scott's fear or Shanice's strength, or the complicated truth that love and damage often live in the same heart, I need you to hit that like button right now. Your engagement matters. It tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be seen, that there are people out there who need to hear about redemption and second chances and the possibility of becoming better than our worst moments. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about transformation. Now let me tell you about the storm that almost destroyed everything. Vivian Mercer had been watching Scott with growing concern for months. The CEO, who had once been completely devoted to Meridian Technologies, was now rearranging his schedule around video calls with infants. The man who had never missed a board meeting was now delegating critical decisions to subordinates while he flew across the country for weekend visits. The partner she had carefully molded into someone she could control was becoming someone else entirely. Someone who prioritized things that had nothing to do with the company. She had manipulated him once before, convinced him that loving Shanice made him weak, orchestrated the public destruction that had removed her rival from the picture. But somehow, despite everything, Shanice had reappeared, and she had weapons Vivian hadn't anticipated. Children, the most powerful leverage imaginable. Vivian understood that she needed to act before Scott's transformation became permanent, before he restructured his entire life around a woman who had every reason to hate him. Before the carefully constructed empire Vivian had helped build slipped through her fingers because its founder had suddenly discovered that money wasn't everything. She started making calls, business journalists she had cultivated over the years, sources at publications that covered the tech industry, people who owed her favors and understood that Vivian's favor was worth having. She crafted a narrative, CEO's secret family revealed, hidden children from an inappropriate workplace affair, questions about judgment and priorities, the kind of story that would generate clicks and controversy and exactly the kind of pressure that might force Scott to choose between his reputation and his inconvenient new attachments. The story broke on a Wednesday morning. Scott saw it first as a Google alert on his phone. Meridian CEO's double life, secret twins, and the assistant he fired. He clicked through to an article that told a version of events designed to make him look like a predator and Shanice look like a victim who had been silenced. His first thought was not about stock prices or board confidence or any of the things the old Scott would have prioritized. His first thought was Shanice. He called her immediately. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight with anger. "I've seen it. I didn't do this. I didn't leak this. You have to believe me. I don't know what to believe. There are reporters outside my apartment building. My grandmother is terrified. Maya won't stop crying because she can sense something is wrong. I'm coming, right now. I'll be there in 4 hours. Don't come here. The last thing we need is photographs of you showing up. Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this." Shanice was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was calmer but no less serious. "Find out who did this, and shut it down." Scott spent the next 6 hours doing exactly that. He called in favors, hired investigators, pressured sources until the truth emerged with damning clarity. Vivian Mercer, the woman he had trusted since the early days, the partner who had been with him through everything. She had orchestrated this exposure deliberately, timing it to cause maximum damage and force him to choose between his public image and his private commitment. The evidence was undeniable. Email trails, phone records, the careful orchestration of a narrative designed to destroy. Scott sat in his office, surrounded by proof of betrayal, and felt something shift inside him. The old Scott would have been angry about the business implications, the stock price drop, the board's concerns, the damage to Meridian's reputation. This Scott was angry about something else entirely. She had attacked Shanice, attacked Maya and Jordan, exposed his children to public scrutiny before he had the chance to introduce them to the world on their terms. That was unforgivable. The board meeting happened the next morning. Emergency session. Vivian confident that the pressure would force Scott to distance himself from his inconvenient family, to prioritize the company over the complications of fatherhood. She had miscalculated. Scott walked into that boardroom with evidence in hand and a clarity he hadn't felt in years. The same room where he had destroyed Shanice 18 months ago now became the room where he destroyed the person who had manipulated him into that destruction. "Before we begin," Scott said, standing at the head of the table, "I need to address the stories that have appeared in the press. Yes, I have children. Twins. 6 months old. Yes, their mother is Shanice Devereaux, who worked as my executive assistant before I ended her employment in circumstances I deeply regret. These are facts I'm not ashamed of and won't apologize for." He paused, letting the words settle. "What I will address is how this information reached the press. I have evidence that someone in this room deliberately leaked private details of my personal life to damage both me and the mother of my children. That someone is Vivian Mercer." The room went silent. Vivian's face drained of color. "I have emails showing you contacted 3 separate journalists in the past 2 weeks, Scott continued. "I have phone records showing conversations with the publication that broke this story. I have testimony from sources you cultivated who are now willing to confirm your involvement in exchange for legal protection." "This is ridiculous," Vivian managed. "You're deflecting from your own poor judgment by attacking me." "My judgment has been poor," Scott agreed. 18 months ago, you convinced me that loving someone made me weak. You framed a beautiful relationship as a professional liability, And I listened. I destroyed the best thing in my life because you made me afraid of my own vulnerability. That was my mistake, and I own it completely." He turned to face the rest of the board. "But I will not let anyone in this room believe that exposing my children to public scrutiny was anything other than a calculated attack. And I will not continue working alongside someone who thought weaponizing my family was acceptable strategy." "What are you saying?" another board member asked. "I'm saying that either Vivian Mercer resigns from this board effective immediately, or I do. This company can function without either of us, but it cannot function with both of us in the same room after what she's done." The vote that followed was decisive, 11-2 in Scott's favor. Vivian was removed from the board, her shares placed in trust pending investigation, her access to Meridian systems terminated before she left the building. Scott watched her go with no satisfaction, just the tired recognition that he had been manipulated for far longer than he wanted to admit, and that cleaning up the mess would take years of work he had barely begun. But he had made a choice. When the pressure came, when the old patterns would have been easy to return to, he had chosen differently. He called Shanice that night. "I found out who did it. Vivian Mercer. She's been removed from the company." "How?" "I told the board everything. Took responsibility for what happened 18 months ago. Showed them evidence of what she did this time. Let them decide who they wanted to trust." Shanice was quiet for a moment. "You took responsibility publicly for how you treated me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because it was true. And because protecting myself at your expense is something I refuse to do anymore." The silence stretched between them. Then Shanice said something he hadn't expected. "Come this weekend. The kids miss you. And I think we need to talk about what happens next." Scott flew out 2 days later, arriving at Shanice's apartment with no agenda other than proving he meant everything he had said. The reporters had dispersed once the story shifted from scandal to something more complicated. The public narrative was evolving from predator and victim to two people navigating an impossible situation with something like grace. Denise answered the door, studying him with the sharp attention she always brought to his visits. "You handled that well," she said finally. "Better than I expected. I handled it the only way I could." She stepped aside to let him in. Maya's inside, demanding attention as usual. "Jordan's been looking at the door for an hour. I think he knew you were coming." The apartment was modest and warm, filled with evidence of a life built carefully from limited resources. Baby toys organized in baskets, family photographs on walls, the handmade blankets Denise created in the evenings draped over chairs and cribs. Shanice stood in the living room, Maya on her hip, watching him enter with an expression he still couldn't quite read. "Hi." Maya reached toward him with demanding hands. He crossed the room and took her, settling her against his chest with the ease of practice. She grabbed his collar immediately, her grip surprisingly strong. "She missed you," Shanice observed. "I missed her too. Both of them." Jordan was in his bouncer, watching the reunion with serious attention. Scott crouched down, still holding Maya, and met his son's eyes. "Hey, buddy, I heard you were waiting for me." Jordan's face broke into one of his rare, genuine smiles. The expression transformed him, made him look like someone experiencing pure joy. "He definitely missed you," Shanice said, her voice softer now. They both did. The weekend that followed established a new normal. Longer visits, deeper conversations, the walls between Scott and Shanice beginning to crack, not into reconciliation but into something that might eventually become genuine partnership. They talked late into the night after the babies were asleep, sitting on her modest couch with cups of tea, covering ground they had never covered before. "I need you to understand something," Shanice said on the second evening. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did. That conference room lives in my memory. The humiliation, the way everyone watched while you destroyed me. I know, but I'm starting to believe you've changed. Not because of your words, because of your actions. 6 months of consistency. The way you handled Vivian. The choices you've been making when no one was watching. Does that mean you trust me? It means I'm starting to think you might be worth trusting. Which terrifies me, honestly, because the last time I trusted you, you proved I shouldn't have." Scott set down his tea and turned to face her directly. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the months you spent alone, pregnant and scared. I can't erase the humiliation or the professional damage or any of the pain I caused. All I can do is be different now. Today, tomorrow, for the rest of my life." "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "Not for them. For us. What do you want? I want whatever you're willing to give. I want the chance to earn your trust, day by day, even if it takes years. I want to be Maya and Jordan's father in every way that matters. And if someday, if you ever decided you wanted more than co-parenting, I would be grateful for that too. But I'm not asking for it. I don't have the right. Shanice studied his face in the dim light, searching for something only she would recognize. You're different, she said finally. Not just saying different things, actually different. I can see it. I'm trying to be. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that changed everything. I'm tired of protecting myself from something that might be good. I'm tired of living in survival mode when something more might be possible. I'm not ready to forgive you. I may never be completely ready, but I'm willing to see what we could become. Slowly. Carefully. Without pretending the past didn't happen. Scott felt something crack open in his chest. Hope mixed with terror, mixed with gratitude so overwhelming he couldn't speak. What does that look like? He managed finally. It looks like you staying longer than weekends. It looks like you being present for more than just visits. It looks like us figuring out how to raise these children together, not just in parallel. And eventually, maybe, it looks like us figuring out if there's something between us worth rebuilding. I'll take whatever you're offering. I'll earn the rest. You'll have to. Because I need to see you stay when things get hard, not just when everything is going well. I'll stay. I promise. Promises mean nothing until they're kept, she reminded him. Then watch me keep them. The months that followed transformed 3 lives in ways none of them had anticipated. Scott relocated to Shanice's city, not into her apartment. That would have been too much too fast. But a house 3 miles away, close enough to be present, far enough to maintain boundaries that still needed maintaining. He restructured Meridian Technologies around his new priorities, delegated responsibilities he had hoarded, built a leadership team capable of operating without his constant oversight, created a Denver office that allowed him to work locally most of the time while traveling to Chicago only when absolutely necessary. Maya and Jordan developed with the stability of children who had 2 present parents, their first words, their first steps. The milestones that Scott had thought he would miss forever now unfolded with him present, participating, essential. He and Shanice built something that defied easy categorization, more than co-parents, not quite partners. 2 people learning to trust each other again through the daily work of raising children who needed them both. There were hard days, arguments about parenting decisions, moments when old wounds reopened and required tending. The slow, difficult labor of rebuilding trust that had been shattered comprehensively. But there were good days too. Family dinners where everyone laughed. Weekend mornings with the children between them. The gradual discovery that they could be better together than they had been apart. 1 year after that clinic waiting room, they stood in Scott's backyard watching Maya and Jordan discover grass for the first time. The twins were walking now, toddling with the unsteady determination of children figuring out their own bodies. Maya demanded to touch everything immediately. Jordan observed carefully before committing to exploration. We did okay, Scott said quietly. Didn't we? We did better than okay, Shanice replied. We did real, messy and imperfect and absolutely real. I love you. The words emerged before he could stop them. Honest in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be. Shanice turned to look at him. For a long moment, she didn't speak. I know, she said finally. I love you too. Still. Again. I'm not sure which. Is that okay? It's terrifying. But maybe that's what real love feels like. Terrifying and worth it at the same time. She reached out and took his hand. He held it like it was the most precious thing he had ever been given. They stood together, watching their children explore the world, building something new from the ruins of what they had destroyed. This isn't a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales don't include 18 months of devastation, 6 months of rebuilding trust, and a lifetime of choosing each other, despite knowing exactly what that choice can cost. This is something harder and more valuable. 2 people who found their way back to each other not despite their wounds but through them. 2 children who will grow up knowing that their father made mistakes but worked every day to be better. 1 family built not on perfect beginnings but on imperfect people committed to trying. Because that's what love really is. Not the avoiding of hurt, but the choosing of someone anyway. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of courage. Not the guarantee of success but the commitment to keep showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Shanice Devereaux learned that survival could become more than just getting by, that the strength she built from crisis could also build something beautiful, that protecting herself didn't mean closing herself off forever from the possibility of trust. Scott Callahan learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but courage, that being present mattered more than being powerful, that the love he had been afraid of his entire life was actually the only thing worth having. And Maya and Jordan, they'll grow up with the best inheritance possible, two parents who fought their way back to each other, who chose every single day to stay. Because in the end, that's what matters most, not how we start but what we choose to become, not the damage we cause but the work we do to repair it, not the people we were but the people we decide to be. One choice, one day, one moment at a time. This has been the story of a billionaire CEO who forcefully demanded she leave, then found her nursing two babies at the clinic. But more than that, this has been a story about the courage it takes to transform, the patience required to earn trust that's been shattered, the love that's possible when two people decide to be better than their worst moments. If this story has moved you, if it's challenged you, if it's made you think differently about redemption and second chances, I need you to take action right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to believe that broken things can be rebuilt. Subscribe to this channel because we're building something special here. A community of people who believe in messy, complicated, real human stories that challenge us to be better. Drop a comment telling me what this story meant to you, what you'll take away from Shanice and Scott's journey. I read every single comment, and your voice matters. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about stories that go deeper than entertainment. Thank you for believing that who we were doesn't have to determine who we become. This is Mr. Dalton's Story House, and I'll see you in the next one.